Our KZN-based top-flight club Royal AM is set to go on sale this Friday as the appointed curator continues efforts to recoup unpaid taxes that are owed by the club owner and businesswoman Shawn Mkhize. While the fate of the club has seemingly already been sealed, many questions still remain, though, around the potential financial and operational implications of the sale, with Cash and Sport Research Director Nqobile Ndlovu estimating that it could cost up to 65 million rand a month to run the club. With the club set to be sold as a going concern while facing a multitude of challenges, what are some of the factors then that potential buyers would need to consider? Well, Nqobile Ndlovu joins me in studio now to discuss this sale in further detail as we look ahead then to Friday when that sale will be going on. Nqobile, thank you so much for making time for us here on the AM Report. And I suppose the big talking point here is being sold as a going concern. If you're looking at a club like Royal AM that still needs to pay Samir Nurkovic, has a FIFA ban, has a potential contract that could be cancelled by the Msunduzi municipality, and outstanding salaries to players, it does seem like one would be inheriting quite a hefty bill. Yeah,
going concern essentially means that its tax liabilities are met, that there are no concerns with regards to outstanding debts and so on and so on. So essentially, if you buy the club, you buy all of its problems along with it. As you said, Samir Nurkovic, the players who are also owed salaries beyond Samir Nurkovic, the PSL disciplinary committee is probably going to impose some sort of sanction or fine on the team as well. All of those things would have to be absorbed essentially by whomever it is that decides to buy the club, if indeed we do find someone who buys the club, because that is a possibility. Yeah, and I'm going to touch on that a bit later on in terms of the other processes that we could see unfold. But talk me through the 65 million rand a month. Of course, several publications quoting that figure coming from you and the research that you've conducted. Take me through what some of the factors are. How did you get to 65 million? Yeah, so I wanted to pose a little bit of a correction there. The 65 million is for the first month. That I estimate would be what would be needed to run the club in the first month. Yeah. Thereafter, it would cost you somewhere in the region between 5 to 8 million rand a month to run the club. How I got to that figure is, firstly, you take the sale of the club. Firstly, you have to pay £1 million fee just in order to bid. So if you're going to bid on Friday, there's £1 million fee. Secondly, you have the 15 million or so, that's the value of the club. I think it could be less given the distress of the asset, but if we go with 14 or 15 million as a fee. Yeah. And then on top of that, you have Samir Nurkovic, who's owed 15 million, it started at 12 million. And then you have a few players who are also owed outstanding fees and salaries, so you add another maybe 5 to 8 million on top of that. And then, let's not forget, Royal AM has to catch up on a lot of matches. To play a home match in the PSL costs you somewhere in the region of between 300 and 600,000 rand per game. You have to play all of those matches within a short period of time. You have accommodation costs, etc., etc. You have to fly the players all over the place within that first month of having owned the club, because you have to catch up all of those games. The moment the PSL says you can play, they're going to be playing a match every 3 days. So I estimate it's going to cost between 55 and 65 million rand in the first month alone, just for the purchase and clearing the debts and everything else. And then after that, there's the month-to-month costs. And now with that said, the big question is, would it be a good investment then? If someone's inheriting this huge bill without really making any money for several months, one would anticipate, would it be a good investment? And if someone's looking at this going, I might want to buy a football club, what are some of the considerations that one would have to look at? As Sizwe Dlomo would say, football is not a good investment. There's no one in South African football, unless you're an Orlando Pirates, Chiefs and maybe Mamelodi Sundowns, who is making money out of football. Most of the owners of PSL clubs are losing money. And the truth is, really, the investment case for South African football at the moment is pretty much not there. You have to do a lot of work in order to attract sponsorship, etc., just even to break even. Most of the clubs are running off of the 2 million rand grant as almost like a revolving credit facility. And they have to do a lot of work out of their own pockets to invest in football. These guys are investors in football. They're not there to they're not making money out of football. It's actually a lost cause for a lot of them. And you touch on that because many clubs have said that, you know, the PSL grant, they're practically living from hand to mouth. It comes in and it goes straight out. So what are we not getting right in South African football? Because other clubs, perhaps overseas, are able to monetize and get some profit out of it. Why is it that we're not able to do that in South Africa? Yeah, I think in South African football, it's very different to other sports. People like to compare South African football to rugby and cricket, etc. But the central models in those other sports, essentially where the union supports all of the entire value chain, including the teams. In South African football, all of the teams are on their own. They don't get, apart from the grant, they don't get all of this support in terms of sponsors. If you look at rugby, for example, SA Rugby negotiates contracts across the board. There's sponsorships that sponsor SA Rugby, and then all of that money filters down into the teams. You know, it keeps the teams afloat. It makes sure things work. In South African cricket, half of the teams are going into administration, but you don't see all of these troubles because Cricket SA is able to bail them out. In South African football, it's very different. So I think we need to do a big job with regards to the brand image of South African football, because unfortunately, it's not to say that the rules don't exist to make sure that the owners are able to support the clubs, etc. But the perception is that the rules don't exist, or at least they're not enforced. So we need to do a little bit of a brand job with regards to that, make things easier for teams in terms of attracting sponsorship, because there have been many cases where teams have said, we can't get sponsorship. Swallows, Cape Town City had a big court case issue, etc., etc. There's many clubs that have gone down because they can't get sponsorship.
Do you feel the custodian of South African football could be doing better in this regard? And what action do you think the PSL should take? I'm quite mindful of time. I want to get to the process of this bid. But what action do you think PSL could take to further support the clubs? You've given examples of SA Rugby and Cricket South Africa and what they are doing. Yeah,
I think the models are very different. And I think the PSL, to their benefit, is doing a lot of work with regards to supporting the clubs. I mean, 600 million rand in terms of broadcast revenue from SuperSport alone is a lot of money, and it all basically flows back to the clubs. The clubs themselves have a lot of work to do with regards to marketing themselves. They don't do a good enough job with regards to that, in my opinion.
Right, let's talk about the sale then. Of course, Friday is when the bids are supposed to come in, but what happens if there is nobody who's going to purchase the club, or the curator feels that perhaps the value is a bit too low? What then happens in that process?
Yeah, I think there's two options that then remain. One is the PSL could buy back the status of Royal AM, but the PSL is not in the business of paying other people's debts. The debts would still need to be paid by someone. So I think that's a bit of a challenging one, but it has happened before where they bought back a status. But that was in a very difficult time and a different time when the aim was to reduce the number of teams in the league, as it happened with Ria Stars. They bought back that status. The other option is liquidation, where it said, well, we can't find a buyer. We're going to sell this thing off one by one, literally to a point where players could be sold off individually, cancel the contract, sell the player. We'll take whatever money is available. We'll sell everything, the chairs, the cars, on an individual one-by-one basis to make sure that we get money back, because the aim for SARS is to get their money back.
Yeah.
It's not about, yes, it would be nice. The current process is to try and preserve the club. That's what a curator does. It's a preservation order, but a liquidation is a fire sale. It doesn't matter. This bottle of water is 20 rand. We'll sell it for 2 rand because that's as much as we can get out of it.
Let's look at the other side of the coin. Say they do find a buyer. Does the buyer then come in immediately and things now need to start running as if there was no change in ownership? And what are the potential implications for the players? Because as we mentioned earlier, some of them still have not been paid. There's outstanding salaries. So would that obligation then fall on the new owners immediately, or what then happens in that case?
Yeah, it's a bit of a difficult situation, because if you look at the documentation, if you're a potential owner, this process should ordinarily take a couple of months. You have to do your due diligence, look at the financials of the club, etc., to get an understanding of what the value is. This is essentially an auction. And, you know, I would assume, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen, I would assume you come in, you buy the club, you put your money down, and then you take over from there. In terms of the players, their contracts and salaries then fall on you or whoever you are as the new owner. So all of that mess has to be worked out immediately. And because the team has so many games, that they have to catch up on, the PSL, it's in their best interest to get as many games going as soon as possible. Because, there's broadcast agreements that require you to play a certain number of games, etc., etc. So your football calendar is your bread and butter. That's what the PSL makes money from. They would want the games to be happening as soon as possible for this situation to be sorted out. But it's not ideal, because you can never do your due diligence in 48 or 72 hours that the owners, whoever is bidding, is being given. It's a very challenging situation.
Very quickly, as we wrap up, I know you usually have your ear to the ground. Have there been any names thrown around in terms of prospective buyers or those that have put in their interest then to get, the club?
I've tried, and so far it's very, very quiet. I know there was a rumor around former Bloemfontein Celtics owners, I am not so sure that they're going to come in, and I'm not so sure that Bloemfontein is going to be resurrected out of this whole situation. I'll give that as a proviso to say I think people must be careful around Bloemfontein Celtics coming back.
All right, let's cap it there then. That's